Okay, so let's look at this video here. So
Tonight on the Fifth Estate, an unprecedented
what I'm going to have you do as we look at it, I'm going to go through clips because I want you to watch for things that show us what a good interview looks like. Bear in mind, this is an interrogation. He's aware he's on camera. Very aware, conscious. If you watch this whole video, disregard the commentary of the people looking at it because they're coming from, well, they're worth listening to. They've got a specific way of interviewing that they think is the right way. And therein, I think, difficulties. I want you to watch more the screen up here, this end, than Williams. Because when we look at the screen up in the corners, we see what he's doing. Let me just race forward here to where I want to get to. So I want you to watch this part of the room up here. These are pretty relaxed conversations. And that's what we're after in an interview. Now, bear in mind, this is an interrogation. Williams knows it's the police, and he knows if he admits what he did, he's going to jail for the rest of his life. So there is risk with it. Every interview, when you ask people to tell you something, ultimately you're asking them to be vulnerable, to give up something that they maybe don't want to talk about, whether they're a victim or there's something upset about, they see you as a person in authority. There's things that make them uncomfortable. And you're asking them to overlook that. So I want you to consider this. Here's the warm-up. So here's how this interview runs. When they start out in the room with a little hello, welcome to, well, here's what we're going to do. He's brought in and they sit down. This room is about 10 by 10. It's a small interview room. Pay attention to how this interviewer, now, he's a detective sergeant, he's an investigator, but interviewer makes use of the room. Does Williams look terribly uncomfortable? Bias. We think the crossed arms typically are seen as being closed and you don't want to speak. In fact, one of the people looking at this says just that. I don't know that it necessarily does. When I learned about his culture, I realized what he is a person with significant authority. So he's being interviewed by a police officer who's got pretty low status in his mind. You got to be polite to the police, but this is a guy who makes decisions about how many people are going to be sent overseas into a war-torn country. He sees himself as a big deal, and therein his ego in play. That crossed arms may just be his authority coming through. He's used to listing people to come into him and tell him some story, ask him if he'll pay for something one way or the other. So when he's doing this, not necessarily the problem we think. You've got to watch what's important in every interview process. You're looking for baseline, whether it's paralanguage or kinesthetics, the body language, whether it's statement analysis, where you look at the words, and that's one method of doing interviews where you dissect the language, or if it's maybe your polygraph. What they do is establish a baseline for your activity. They look to see what's the thing you do, and then you look for change. So let's listen to this a little bit.
As too, that the prints belong to boots owned by Russell Williams.
This is a photocopy of the boot that you took off your foot just a little while ago, okay?
They're the boots Williams wore on January.
So if we go back here in the room, in the interview room earlier on, they're sitting across the room. If you can see here, he's resting on the table. It'll come clearer in a second. Look at the gap. Look at that table. How do you use a table? This does not look to me like an oppressive interview.
I just think there was a whole bunch of activity spun up as a result, obviously.
Conversation.
I can't remember the day of the week.
Detective Sergeant Smith takes the bungled answer as an opportunity to set out in another direction, challenging Williams to prove he's innocent.
So ask for some detail.
To do a similar...
So they're in a hard question. Keep it relaxed.
got off on having that label. Bernardo.
Now, so moving in here, what you see in this part here where he slid in.
Really, really fast.
They've shown him boot prints. The initial discussion is asked from a bit of distance. Then he slides in and he uses the table. Watch here what happens with this table, how the table plays out. Because the table's a significant tool. If you think about people, bosses you've worked for, big desks, the desk builds a barrier between you and the person you're speaking to. If you've got a table sitting there, and the person's willing to
I
talk.
gotta treat you with respect, and I've asked you to do the same for me.
Here's what I know.
We talked about the whole idea of how we've approached you here, okay? The trying to be as discreet as possible.
Williams doesn't look
But the
uncomfortable.
problem is, Russell, is every time I walk out of this room, there's another issue that comes up, okay? And it's not issues that point away from you, it's issues that point at you, okay?
So the interviewer here has given up some information, has provided information, opening the door for this person to be empowered. And I think empowered is an important part of any interview, especially so in this an interrogation. And I only use it because it's got such high risk and everybody's conscious of the risk, as opposed to something where it's emotional. The child that doesn't want to say about the abuse they've suffered by a parent, fear of what might come, fear of more violence, fear of how they'll be judged. They've been told it's bad to talk. Who knows what's in their mind, but emotionally they're just uncomfortable. So you're trying to get them past that discomfort. Giving up information sometimes is a tool that's useful. Making use of the furniture.
And I want you to see what I mean, all right?
So he's sat down, given up information, opens
This
up,
is
watch.
the footwear impression of the person who approached the rear of Jessica Lloyd's house.
So he's invited the person, the interview subject, in close. That, putting the document on the corner of the table. It's not across the table, note that. It's on the corner of the table. So they're both got an element of exposure. But on the corner of the table, it invites the interview subject in. If the interview subject comes in, it's an indication they're willing to connect. Often you will get they won't. They'll just sit and listen. They're not coming in. So you've got to get a sense of, and read, that's the stuff you read. What's their baseline activity? And does it change?
On the evening of the 28th and 29th of January, okay?
Detective Smith now knows, as the Colonel does too, that the prints belong to boots owned by Russell Williams.
So there's the detail. And now the ask. Now look at this. In a little closer.
This is over. And it can have a bad ending where Jessica's parents continue to wonder where her daughter's lying. I don't know. I mean, obviously, there's a huge search still underway, and it'll continue. It'll continue until her body's found. That might even happen tonight, for all I know.
So if you look here, Williams is listening intently. That crossed arms looks different than the earlier ones. And when you look at the facial features, the way he was sitting, the relaxed piece, he is potentially here tightened up a little differently before. So it might be somewhat valuable. The interviewer is giving up information. Now, much of this, bear in mind, Williams knows. We can know in hindsight he's got a sociopathy, psychopathy going on there. But at the time, Williams knows what it is to interview. Williams knows what it is also to tell people the power you have and what you're going to do and the reality that they may not. So all he has to say is lawyer, and this all ends. He doesn't, though. He continues to listen. And I think it's because there's a rapport going on.
Once that happens, then I don't know what other cards you would have to play. What are we going to do?
The language of we.
Smith not only wants Williams to confess, but perhaps even more pressing, to direct them to the body of Jessica Lloyd. The silence continues for half a minute. Then, a glimmer of hope.
Russell,
He called him Russell.
what are we going to do?
Only Russ, please.
So that may be an indication of there is some rapport being built. When he said by going to the less formal name, potentially. You've got to be careful. Don't read it too hard. That's the bias that comes in. So it's back and forth. This is a silence game. Do I donate? Williams doesn't want to say anything. So this is just an interview. Somebody doesn't want to be vulnerable and give up what they know. And the interviewer wants to know something. So think of it only that far. And they carry on.
Russell, what are we going to do?
So there's some eye contact. So these answers aren't coming right away. This is rapport building. Still. It goes on for some time. Now, something here that you'll see, because when they look at this, what they talk about is Williams mirroring the behavior of the interviewer. Counseling often teaches you
Something
that.
missing that you're struggling?
To mirror the activities of the person you're interviewing. I'm going to suggest that you consider what you do, and do they start to mirror you? Are they coming along with you? It's not do you connect with them. You're looking to see if they're connected with you. So if you make movements, are they moving with you? When you sit back, when you lean in, hands up. And they suggest here that some have said...
Shed some light on for you.
And finally, his determination pays off.
I'm struggling with how upset my wife is right now.
Russ, what are you looking for?
Leaning in. This is not a fearful place.
I'm concerned that they're tearing apart my wife's brand new house.
So am I. But if nobody tells them what's there and what's not, they don't have any choice.
So how do we do that?
Well, we start by telling the truth.
So when they
What
ask
follows
a
is
question...
another half minute of silence.
Okay.
Okay.
Then, a most remarkable moment.
So where is she?
So there's the big question.
4 hours, 40 minutes, and 10 seconds after they sat down.
Get him out.
4 hours and 40 minutes of warm-up before that question. Consider that. Interviewing, in-depth qualitative interviewing can be very long. This is not different. This interrogation is not different than what a good in-depth interview may go. And I think of one I was involved in. We were back and forth with a research subject who just kept talking. It made sense to keep going, so we did. So consider that in this.
Is she close to where she lives? I've got maps of that general area.
So they get a map, and now there's disclosure. So the person
See what I
is
got here. I might have something.
allowed themselves to be vulnerable. And that's what the interview is about. And I want you to consider this, because here's where, from the point of view of just trying to acquire information and data, if you like, that notion of collecting information gives us an idea. Well, okay, I got it. He's told us where the body is. They can go and find her. They can now have their evidence. So they've got a case. It's in a lot of ways done. But I'm going to suggest that there's a little more that matters beyond that. If we go to this piece here, let me just pull it back. This little clip here. Oh, give me a sec. It's coming up. The actions of the investigator who, now that it's completed, stops. And this is, to me, the indicator that this is what a good interview looks like. It's you built rapport in the room. And if you built rapport, you keep the rapport. This, if you watch it all, it sounds like two guys talk, terrible incident, terrible things. But it's like they're talking like over a drink, like a Pepsi or something at a local pub. This little piece here, where the investigator stands up.
Well, I've erased them, but I expect you'll be able to draw images of Jessica and I.
What about Marie?
So what he's done there
Over a
is,
week.
Was it fairly quick from the time
it's finished.
she left?
Friday night.
Why continue to talk?
Friday night?
Yeah.
Because he's comfortable with the interviewer.
Friday night.
In Tweed.
With you?
Yeah.
How long was she alive for?
Almost 24 hours, not quite.
He's given significant deal. Why? And I'm going to suggest why.
You're doing the right thing here.
It's because that interviewer made it a comfortable environment. The handshake, you're doing the right thing here. There's no need to shake hands with this person. The interviewer doesn't feel any regard for him, but they built rapport. It's a legitimate rapport. It's not just all phony. It actually has to be legitimate for the time you're there.
Okay.
Well, again, my interest is in making my wife's life a little easier.
He knows.
So what's interesting in that is there's a reason he's done it. He's given up, and now he has given it up. So what do I get in return? That handshake, I'm going to suggest, turns everything over. The next piece is where Williams offers up more information. It's not a case of he just knows it and they're going to go find it.
Whose images are on those cards?
Well, I've erased them, but I expect you'll be able to draw images of Jessica and I.
So what he did here, and I think because of the rapport that was built, because a good interviewer managed the room well so that the interview subject felt comfortable, it's done. They've collected their information. Both are at a point of conclusion. That little handshake that reaffirmed we actually have a rapport here, Williams offers up that there's a USB, a small flash drive, in his home, tells them exactly where to go and look and what's on that flash drive. And that's the beginning of the complete opening of the whole can of everything. He spent another 4 hours to go on and describe all of the other assaults he did. And imagine that's in an interrogation with your whole life going to jail. That's what hangs in the wind. This isn't an upsetting moment. This is huge thought out risk. In an emotional scenario, you would do the same with the person where it's an emotional concern. You're going to try and do it in such a way that they feel comfortable to be able to be vulnerable with you. And what's important with that is you actually have to protect them. You actually have to go out of the way to protect their confidentiality, which is not just to hide their name, it's to hide identifiers that tell who they are. And given the nature of the work that many of you are in, you may well be in a courtroom being questioned on the interview, how it went the way it did, why did it go the way it did, what information did you have going in, all of those sorts of things. So this is a valuable tool to look at because it's got high risk and it's about vulnerability.